Okay, again, my name is Nestor Ashbury. Welcome on behalf of APRA Maryland to the presentation on Intelligent Insights, the partnership program between DonorSearch and Futurus Group. Our presenters today are going to be Bill TeDesco, who is the founder, CEO, and managing partner of DonorSearch, and Nathan Chappell, who's the president of Futurus Group. Between the two of them, they've got about 40 years of knowledge that they're going to be leveraging to design this tool that they're about to talk about for the next hour. So I'm going to be quiet now and mute myself and let them get started. If there are any questions, throw them in chat and we will try to get to them at the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nestor. For all of you that are here, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. To give you context, DonorSearch's relationship, we're in Maryland. We've had a relationship with APRA Maryland that I think is extending between 5 and 10 years at this point. And during those 5 or 10 years, we had the opportunity to be volunteers, sit on the board, sponsors, access to resources. It's an important relationship, and we appreciate the opportunity. I'm using that as context because joining us today is Nathan Chappell. Nathan is the president of the Futurus Group. Futurus Group is, I think, maybe a year and a half old at this point. And they're probably, in my opinion, they're the premier supplier of AI-based solutions in the nonprofit market. As maybe some of you know, that the nonprofit market has been slow to adopt AI-based sort of technologies to improve operations. I couldn't be happier. Just kind of as a heads up here, we're going to probably go an hour, maybe a little hour, well, less than an hour, and then we'll do questions. I'd ask that you kind of hang in there. We have a kind of an incentive. APRA Maryland's membership has kind of asked us if there was anything we could supply to the folks that were attending as kind of an incentive to come to the session. So there is a premium at the end that frankly is, if you're interested, it will give you a taste of the AI-based solutions that our two companies have developed together. So next slide there, Nathan. This is something that I feel fairly passionate about. Those of you that know me know that I certainly haven't been in the industry for 40 years, but I think when you add the two totals together, we're probably a little more than 40 years. I think that it was about a year and a half, maybe two, well, a little less than 2 years ago, that it became pretty apparent to me that the modeling techniques and the sort of services that we provide could be expanded upon and provide greater value and utility to nonprofits. And I've kind of dedicated my career to doing that. So I'm particularly excited about what the potential is at this point. We're not going to shy away from any of the details here, folks. And it kind of culminates with a joint project that the two companies have put together. About a year ago, we started looking around for a partner to engage from an artificial intelligence and machine learning perspective. And there was just one clear opportunity that we saw that would be at a level that we consider to be comparable to what we're delivering with DonorSearch. So that is the Futurus connection. With that said, I'm going to ask Nathan to talk a little bit about what he sees as the potential. He is the expert in this, and he comes from a very robust background of nonprofit fundraising and operational experience. So, Nathan?
Yeah, well, thank you, Bill. And I also want to echo APRA Maryland for allowing us this opportunity, for everyone that's joining. Bear with Bill and I, we've presented before, but doing this you know, from across the coasts and trying to coordinate. It's kind of like group work in college, but we'll get there, and hopefully our passion and energy will translate into this presentation. But similar to that, and while I don't want to age myself too much, this is actually my 20th year in nonprofit, and always have been an early adopter and looked at technology in ways to enhance and accelerate business. And it's been so exciting for us to be able to work with DonorSearch over the last year. I was thinking, actually, we had a conversation, it might have been at APRA last year, around how are we going to do this? How are we going to leverage, you know, big data from DonorSearch with our machine learning, you know, bench and expertise? And fast forward, a lot of hard work, and we're here to present what something that's never been done before in our industry, and something that we think is really exciting and will help a lot of nonprofits. So do we want to just dive right in, Bill?
I think that's best.
All right. And then we'll have to just give each other cues to advance these slides. But starting with just this real quick background of each of our companies. Bill has already teed this up a little bit, but can expand on it. Most of you know DonorSearch because you have worked with DonorSearch over the years. But really, what drew us to DonorSearch was the vast data array of philanthropic giving, in addition to a culture of wanting to support the nonprofit sector. And very much our partnership is aligned by this notion that data and technology together can help boost a net increase in philanthropy. So our vision at Futurus Group is to use AI to increase philanthropy by 1% worldwide. It's an ambitious goal. In the US alone, it would be an increase of $200 billion, but I should say 1% of GDP. So it would be, it's an exciting opportunity because technology on its own is nothing without the data, and data without the technology is the same. So it's those two things coming together. As Bill mentioned, we launched Futurus Group just about a year and a half ago, actually, March 1st of last year. It was a passion project, had been worked on for several years, but we are now the first company to file patents, and we're in a provisional patent stage now on 2 patents, which are the first to use machine learning for gratitude prediction. We have about 20 members of our team. We do traditional consulting, work very deep in hospitals, but now also higher education and religion. And all of it is driven by this idea that machine learning, specifically in deep learning, can really help nonprofits increase their efficiency beyond what has ever been possible before. Bill, anything you want to add about DonorSearch?
No, there's well, maybe just a little. The cultural match was pretty key for us. Aside from these guys being the best at it, it was also important that, you know, they were in it for the right reason. And they're in it to try to improve the way nonprofits raise money. So that's in alignment. So yeah, it is, it's been a year. Yeah,
and everyone knows that working with people that are aligned in values and vision makes the work, you know, meaningful, and it really has been for both of our teams, I think, coming together. So we'll take a step back just for a few seconds, but there's an article, and now it's crazy that this is 2 years old, but it's nothing. It's really could have been written 10 years ago. This idea that AI is a must is something that I think people in the nonprofit sector have taken for granted. I started and sold 2 private companies before I got into the nonprofit sector 20 years ago. And this idea that technology innovation drives revenue in the private sector is something that is just common knowledge and common practice. It's what drives the private sector in so many ways. The nonprofit sector is very slow to adopt. There are a lot of reasons for that, which would be a whole different presentation. But some of this, the epiphany comes to this idea that the act of using AI is no longer a luxury, or the adoption of AI is no longer a luxury. But this article, and we'd be happy to email it to everyone, is essentially points out this fact that just adopting AI is not enough. It's this idea that adopting AI, but investing the time and resources in doing that will either set you forward or set you back. By not doing it, there's a compounding loss of time if you're not going to adopt AI that others do, that you're going to fall further and further behind. As most of our clients know, there's a process of building a model, deploying a model, retraining a team, and all of that takes time. So this idea of starting now is critical. And I do get concerned about the nonprofit sector's reluctance to try new things. And the exciting part is that there are now solutions like Intelligent Insights that are available to nonprofits without having to take a huge gamble in doing it yourself. The second part is, we all know in the nonprofit sector that, you know, there's different recommendations that come out every year. Grant Thornton is one of them, that they provide a guide of the state of nonprofit sector every year. Last year, I was surprised to see their #1 recommendation in the nonprofit sector was to deploy AI to enhance business operations or transform business operations. But to be honest, a year and a half ago, I was presenting on this, and there were very few use cases of AI, either in mission delivery or in fundraising. And I'm excited that a year and a half, 2 years later, that there are so many great examples of nonprofits that are using AI from, I mean, a wide variety of a spectrum, from delivering blood to people in Rwanda via drone, or for fundraising, or to use it in stewardship, and blockchain is playing a big part in that. So there's just a lot of exciting movement in the nonprofit sector, and I think what we're doing is that you know, we're still in the very beginning of this adoption phase. But what Intelligent Insights is something that can go to scale in the nonprofit sector in a way that has not existed before. So just a real quick, while we're going to talk mainly about Intelligent Insight today, Futurus Group developed this Gratitude to Give platform, which is machine learning, using lots of data from machine learning. The premise of our business and our entire company is around this idea that experience is greater than wealth. And it's not a slam on wealth data, but we've always looked at it as a two-sided coin. One side of the coin is whether or not someone is likely to give. The other side of the coin is how much they might give. And we proved early on that using wealth data alone was not a great predictor of whether someone would give in the first place. But we knew that without wealth data, we wouldn't know if a prospect was an annual giving prospect, or a major giving prospect, or a principal, or transformative. And one of the things so we've gotten very good at doing this. We do this with some of the top clients, top hospitals across the country. We use lots of experiential data, and we serve up scores of people that are likely to give very accurately, based on their experiences within a healthcare organization, or in religion, or higher ed. But one of the things that's bothered me is that as I present across the country, AFP and different chapters, groups, is that people in a lot of nonprofits often ask, well, that's great if you can afford, you know, to build a custom model and you've got the time and the money, but what about other nonprofits that just need to go now? Like, how can they leverage AI? And I started out in the Boys and Girls Club. My first 7 years were in Boys and Girls Club, and we were talking about having to wear lots of different hats. I was a grant writer, I was a fundraiser, I delivered programs, and you really don't have the luxury to just have you know, your own kind of dedicated deep learning analytics. And the idea back then, if I had the ability to look at all of our constituents, and at the time, you know, we were raising a few $1 million a year, and you know, had a few 100,000 constituents, and I needed to know who I should have lunch with every day. But I had no way of actually culling through our data to figure that out. So if there was only a way to do that for the average nonprofit to really help prioritize your effort, then they could become much more efficient. And that's where I put myself in many of your shoes, spending 20 years in the nonprofit sector. Having the data served to you in a way that you can act upon it is critical. It's not enough just to have really good data or impressive graphs. It has to be actionable, and it has to be, you know, you have to have the ability to actually work from that and see the results. And this is you, Bill.
Yep, yep. I'm watching the time here. We have to be careful. I want to give you an opportunity to ask questions at the end. In developing this project in conjunction with Nathan and Futurus and the Global Group, there was a starting point for us. It is that we've been in business for at that point we'd been in business for 11 years. And we kind of built a reputation around providing classic sort of wealth screening, but then we added this extra dimension to it where we started looking at philanthropic information. We knew from talking to the clients that we had worked with what the potential was there. When that data, that intelligence is applied to fundraising activities, that there is an improvement. If you use it, then you become more efficient because you're talking to the right people at the right time. It took me a little bit of time to realize that this was just an extension of that same concept. The idea is, and I'm bringing this up because there's nothing here to shy away from. We have gone out of our way to make this affordable. We've gone out of our way to make it familiar and very tactical in the way that it can be applied in any nonprofit. So I'd like to start the process of helping folks understand it's not that big of a leap. It is a leap in terms of the difference in the technology that's being used. It's basically technology that you guys haven't had access to before, and frankly, we didn't either. But conceptually, what it's doing is it's the same idea of the classic screening is that you're trying to identify the place or the people you should be talking to the next day, or the list of people that you should be making an attempt to stay in contact with based on data from that you have stored in your CRM or data that you've entered in there. This is the logical extension. It says that in addition to the information that you had in the past to make those decisions, you now have more information. And well, with that said, I'll ask for the next slide there. So what we're trying to do, and Nathan touched on it briefly, is when the classic approach to doing AI, and still clearly the most powerful way to use AI, is to do a full-blown custom model. But after you spend some time looking at how that is done, and then drawing the parallel to kind of classic modeling approaches, you realize that the majority of the costs, which would make it unattainable for, frankly, most of the clients that DonorSearch has had over the years, has been the upfront costs associated with mapping the custom fields to the model so that you could begin to extrapolate from there. What we've done, and this is part of what took over the past year, is we've built a national data set of known giving histories for nonprofits. Just right out of the start, it's anonymous data, so the model itself doesn't even know who the people are. They don't have street addresses for them. But what it does look at is it looks at known giving histories, how many times they gave, time frame they gave, what the lifetime giving is, classic sort of RFM calculations or Libont and Sibont sort of calculations. But now it's being meshed with full-blown wealth and philanthropic data, as well as another I think it comes out to somewhere between 150, 200 fields of a demographic profile of the individual. So, kind of stealing a little bit of Nathan's thunder at this point, is basically what we're doing is we're connecting all this stuff together, and we're using the national model that, frankly, Nathan conceived, and we're comparing nonprofits' files against that national model to identify and rank people so that you know what the recommendation is as to who you should spend time talking to. So the whole concept is try to make it available to, frankly, even the smallest nonprofit. Mm-hmm. I'll tip the hand here a little bit. I probably wouldn't be very good at playing bridge or any sort of team card games. because I'm tipping the hand. The price range for this sort of thing ranges for existing DonorSearch clients, because they've already got a lot of the groundwork done in terms of building the data out, ranges from $2,000 to less than $10,000. And that's one of the major breakthroughs here by using this combination of technologies. Next slide. Again, we've talked about this before. Basically, we're bringing together our expertise, our distribution center, our clients, our expertise together with a new entry into the market, but experienced nonetheless, to pull this together and frankly provide something that, as Nathan mentioned before, is unique in the industry. So, Nathan?
That's awesome. Yeah, as Bill's talking, what we've accomplished, sometimes we forget because we're so close to it, is, like I said before, never been done before. It's really, really exciting to take a massive data set like DonorSearch and really powerful technology and mesh those together to provide really affordable scores that are highly accurate to the nonprofit sector at scale is ridiculously cool. Like, we're just so excited about it. When we started conceptualizing this idea of intelligent insight, and we didn't have a name for it then, we had some beta name for it, I think, but it came out that it was really not okay just to have one score. And this idea of like, well, is someone a donor or a non-donor? Well, that's important. And we know that only 56% of Americans make gifts, which is why DonorSearch's philanthropic database is so important in identifying what donors look like. It wasn't going to solve the pain points for most of the nonprofits that we knew and we have gotten to know over the years. So this pushing to like really solve these problems, to really support the nonprofit sector a bit more holistically, really pushed us to think about it in a couple different quadrants. So in the end, we took this massive data array. It was 6 million records, 1.8 billion data points, and we spent a good part of 8 months, probably 10 months, working through the machine learning piece of it. And we output 4 different scores. So each model was trained specifically to address a certain pain point. One is acquisition, one is retention, one is upgrade, and one is lifetime. We have a slide for each of these to get in a bit deeper. But in the end, especially for DonorSearch clients, that you've already got the data and the infrastructure there through DonorSearch, is that we could run your existing data and output 4 different scores for each of these targets in very, very quickly. Ultimately, what this gives you is 4 new tools that leverages all the DonorSearch data, but also all the DonorSearch calculations and things that they've built over the years, their likelihood scores. It leverages all of that together to provide speed and accuracy, in which ultimately is the holy grail for nonprofit. It's about efficiency. It's about making sure that each solicitation is targeted to the very best prospect at the right time. And that's what we've been able to do. So 4 different models: acquisition, retention, upgrade, and lifetime value. We deliver those, and actually, Bill, you can talk about how this is integrated into Prospect View. Might be the most logical thing to explain, because it just makes it so easy to use.
Yeah, actually, I think that's next slide. Is it? No. Oh, well, sure. As you would expect, this first iteration of it, as Nathan was talking about, we have these 4 different targets that we have pointed the AI at. That is acquisition. And while it has a very broad application for the annual fund, direct marketing, it also has an application from a major gift perspective as well. One of the things that is kind of bundled into this is that you have a full-blown wealth review, philanthropic review, and you have this profiling of what the people in your file look like and who else looks like those folks. From an integration perspective, we were ready to kick this off where that would just be delivered as 4 different scores that would be external to your system. We literally released, I think it was yesterday. This is, for those of you that know our product, we have something called the totals table, where it's like an Excel spreadsheet on steroids. And now the values from the intelligent insight are now recorded directly in there. So literally, the goal was, from our perspective, is the clients would be able to say, give me the people who have the most potential, excuse me, let's say to upgrade. That was the 3rd score that we had talked about. And you can do that side by side now with their estimated wealth capacity. You can do that side by side with the name of the company that the person works for. You can do that side by side with the size of the single largest gift the person's ever given before. So it has an application, very strong application for anything where you're doing high numbers of solicitations, but it also has a direct application too in trying to identify people who are going to be the most responsive according to these different values. And the other part here too that Nathan and I have talked about is that this is the beginning. We can begin to point the model to identify different constituencies as well. We can go beyond acquisitions, retentions, upgrade, and lifetime value. When we got the data back, we understood why Nathan and his crowd are highly paid. We could barely decipher the results. It's I don't think I've looked at anything that had 6 digits of decimals before and been able to convert it into something real. But with their coaching and assistance, what we were able to do was to boil down to good, better, and best. And there is a category which says we can't rate. And it's because we didn't have the full set of data available to us. And rather than give you a partially calculated ranking, we just elected to show them as can't rate. That's about as simple as we thought we could make it. Each one of those is going to have a score. It'll be 1, 2, 3, or 4. And again, to make it, or to relate it to what you've already been doing, you're basically, it's a way to rank the entire file, but now you're using a lot more information to get to the same decision. You're still using the classic fields that you're accustomed to, all the giving history. Some of you would also be accustomed to using wealth or philanthropic information for that. But now you're also going further and you're doing a full-blown profile as to what those people look like that perform that way for you. And then that's used to predict what folks that aren't engaged with you would be best suited to. Mm-hmm. So, next. Yes. I mentioned this before. The deal here is we're trying to make this affordable. We're trying to make this something that any nonprofit can take a shot and actually try it out. And we strongly suggest you compare it to what you're doing. Do an A/B test, do it side by side. I recently read something from one of the marketing agencies, and it was an interesting concept that basically said, yeah, AI is smarter than us, and it's smarter at making decisions about who to reach out to. It's smarter to make decisions about, frankly, it can be used to help begin to define how you're going to reach out to them. I think, the good news is it's like medicine. This is medicine that we now have that we didn't have before. We have technology, we have the data, and we have a process that makes it affordable. Give it a shot, folks. I mean, it's one of the major benefits from COVID is that certainly in the for-profit and nonprofit markets, we've seen an acceleration of adoption of technology. I think nonprofits were just kind of moving that direction, but they were moving fairly slowly. And now all of a sudden we all kind of got schooled and we had to get it done in 6 months. This is just view this as potentially one of the benefits from an otherwise horrible experience with COVID. Yeah. So next. This was the slide I was looking for. But anyway, the idea here is that the client data, the wealth data, the philanthropic data. We take that, we also add to a consumer file. We move it over into the AI calculations, and for existing clients, we'll move it into a what we call our totals table. And if you're not an existing client, that's fine. And frankly, if you don't want the data that way, we're happy to give it to you the other way, including the good, better, best, and the 8 or 6 decimal point scores that you actually get back for each of the 4 categories. Next slide. Nathan, is this you?
No, it's still you, but it's more of what we were just talking about.
Okay.
I mean, the idea here is that, client really doesn't have to do anything. We've got, other than provide us the original, list, and your DonorSearch client, that list already exists. So it's just basically saying yes and pull the trigger. Our model is built in an automated fashion so that it actually picks up. It's a decision tree, and we have a couple slides to show you. But it knows if this is a prior donor or not a prior donor or not a donor, and it will score appropriately those 4 different scores and then send it back. It's done almost entirely automated so that it can be done really efficiently. The last step of this is that there's actual people that have eyes on it before it actually goes and gets uploaded to your prospect view. But this is a very efficient way to go, and it's done very quickly. So and I want to fly through these because I know we're going to be short on time, and definitely want to have time for questions. In the end, machine learning works. The more data you have, the more accurate it becomes. That was one of the advantages of working with DonorSearch. We pulled 6 million plus records, which was really nothing. We want to get to the point where we're pulling 50 million records and continuing to enhance. The more data you get, the more nuanced the data is, the more accurate the model will become. The more clients that use this, the more accurate it will become. So we're retraining this model basically on a monthly basis or as the data changes. So as any of DonorSearch's data changes nationally, and they have data from lots of different sources, we then take that new data, retrain the model, so it's always being refined to be the most accurate that it possibly can. Ultimately, what we found by using DonorSearch's 249 data points is that there are 4,000 features. There are basically features is something that's statistically relevant. So this, the model determined out of the 249 data points, there are basically 4,000 calculations that are used on a per prospect basis to identify their likelihood of giving. And all that's doing is comparing the person that you're uploading into the system against the 6 million people that we use to train the model. So it's a pretty robust model. And again, no one in our field has ever done this with a data set this large. So it's really exciting to start seeing some national trends. Ultimately, I added this slide because people tend to understand how this works. It's like a 4,000 endpoint version of Plinko. It starts out with one prospect at the very top, and in the end, instead of like the 10 kind of buckets that you have here, they're literally, this decision tree goes 4,000 deep. And all it's doing is looking at donor, non-donor, giving, non-giving, last date gift, non-last gift, and it goes and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. What it looks like in real life is something like this. The very top screenshot is just literally the top echelon of the decision tree. And then the middle one is actually an expanded view of that, where it actually starts getting bigger and bigger. And then the bottom view is actually a screenshot of what the 4,000 basically calculations look like. So every prospect, if you can imagine, that is rated is gone through these 4,000 decision trees to come up with what Bill was referring to, the 6 decimal point numerical value of how likely they are to give in each of the 4 categories. And so that's done 4 different times for every single constituent. And again, it's measured against the 6 million people that we train the model against. It's pretty amazing in terms of what the technology can do. Within a few hours, run your database against 4,000 calculations and 6 million prospects?
Why don't we why don't we consider this to be a one-way skip?
Okay.
Okay. So I was looking at the questions, and there was a quick question here. Somebody was asking whether or not we could bring this data in using the DonorSearch API at this point. It is fully within our plans to do that, but from a product development perspective, we've just reached the second stage where it's fully integrated into our retail products. The next stage after that is putting it into the API, and then the third step after that would be to customize the Salesforce app so that that can be brought into there. If it's something that you wanted to move on quickly, let us know. Just responding to somebody who had a question in the chat room. I would encourage you to start putting in your chat requests right now so that we don't run out of time at the end. Excuse me. As I mentioned before, each of the different categories is going to be rated as good, better, and best, as well as can't rate. You'll be in the position where you can sort and filter based on each of those categories. And as I mentioned, you'd have these additional fields that would be directly adjacent to it and be able to do the same with those as well.
Yeah.
All right.
The idea of making this as easy as possible. So just 4 slides, one on each of the 4 models. And I think this is the important part and what you want to know. And I should say that I've had a chance to use this. I do pro bono consulting with a group called FarmLink that started out of COVID, and it's college students that raised $1 million in the last 8 weeks and delivered 10 million pounds of food as of last weekend. And they've had several thousand donors over the past couple months. And we used intelligent insights for me to help them prioritize where they should spend time. So the first score that comes out with those ratings is acquisition score. So this is looking at 6 million, of those, what donors look like, a lookalike model. It's looking for those 56% of Americans that make gifts and comparing your constituents. And this makes a heavy use of DonorSearch data from the sense of there are similarities of some people who make gifts. Out of those 249 data points that we use, it turns out there's some correlations that we got pretty good at identifying what those 56% of Americans look like. So this acquisition score is really to help you primarily in the direct response in digital world, figuring out like if you're going to go and solicit X number of people, the ones with ACQ1 and ACQ2 are those that you want to prioritize. Depending on budget, maybe you eliminate the 3s and 4s, but it definitely helps you cut through and gives you a pretty big shortcut in who you should focus your effort on from the acquisition perspective. The second, to me, is the golden standard of nonprofits with retention rates kind of hovering around 40%, I think nationally. This idea of keeping a donor versus finding a new donor is something that all nonprofits should have at the top of their list. So this score for us is extremely important. It identifies people that have given before but are likely to give again. And this is one that I've been able to use directly with the clients that I've actually been working with, and saying this is who you should these are the people that you should prioritize your time with right now. These are the people that you should phone call to thank them for their gift, to keep them motivated. And ultimately, we've been using this with the one pro bono client that I'm trying this out with for sustainers, and it's been really helpful. The advantage of using this score is that actually it does all the calculations of lie bunts and side bunts for you. It factors all of that in. I mean, again, 4,000 calculations to help surface accurately who are the people that are most likely to be retained as donors. And of course, that requires your hard work, but it gives you a place to start from. The upgrade score is really built to be a score to identify people that could give a gift of at least $250. So getting more into the DonorSearch data in wealth, the mid-range model uses average home value, number of gifts, and the list is 4,000 deep, but it also, like I said before, makes heavy use of DonorSearch's prior scores like the annual fund likelihood, the major gift likelihood, and it takes all those data points and aggregates them, and then actually predicts who are the people that are likely to give a one-time gift of at least $250. We trained that model to 83% accuracy in what's called recall. Actually, all these models hover around 80% accuracy, but they became very good, which is why it took, a good 10 months of building and training these models to accurately predict the people that would fall into each of these buckets. And the last of the 4 scores that you'll receive is a lifetime value score. So the lifetime value score of LTV1, those are people that are most likely to give 1,000 or more during their lifetime. So it's really a score to look at, like your bread and butter donors, those that are going to be with you for the long haul. Again, based on all the data points that we use to crunch and build these models, there are correlations between people who give one-time gifts. There are correlations between people who don't give at all. And there are correlations between people who tend to stay with organizations. And all of those factors and features are built into these models to basically do that number crunching for you so that you don't have to figure that out. A lot of it is there are things that you sense and feel as you're working with donors that they're going to be with you. There are data points left behind that actually speak to that, and we're able to quantify it by throwing all of this into this machine learning format. So those are the 4 scores.
I was on this 4th score and working with our staff and helping them understand it. The concept that you'd want to target folks that are likely to give $1,000 over the course of their lifetime on the file. Our staff spends all their time working, or has traditionally spent their time working on identifying prospects that make a single gift of $5,000 or more on a regular basis. So they didn't understand what the significance of this was. So I said, well, we'll take a look at some of the files that clients have shared with us and take a look at the previous giving histories. And what you find out very, very quickly is that the donors that are actually making $1,000 over their lifetime, or there was evidence that they'd given $1,000, it's an incredibly small percentage of the file. It is, frankly, I didn't find any files where it was over 10%. And most of the files I looked at, it was somewhere between the 5 and 6% range. I think sometimes, when we get focused on major gifts, we get kind of myopic about that and say, well, sure, every nonprofit has them, but the volume at which a nonprofit has major donors, and let's go back to a simple calculation of $5,000 or more. That's generally not going to be much more than 2, 3, 4% of the entire file. And then it drops off very sharply. To bridge the gap between people who give you $25 for the first time based on a solicitation that you've done, to move them to the $1,000 lifetime level, is in terms of the gross number of records that you're looking at before you can identify those folks, is an absolutely Herculean sort of task. I think we lose sight of that sometimes. What you're doing is you're taking a very large population of people and mining it, frankly, data mining it, down to the top 3%, top 5%, top 7%. But that's frankly, with the concentration of wealth, I think it's a skill set that nonprofits are going to have to become better and better at. Mm-hmm. There are actually a couple questions there, if you don't mind my jumping into those.
Yeah.
Let's see, keep them coming.
Well, wait, if we could do a Q&A at the end, I think if you have a couple more slides, we got a few questions written down for you.
All right. You had promised not to talk, Andy. Go ahead. Yeah, the closing slides here. I know why Andy jumped in. It's because he's the membership chair. He wants everybody to know that we've, between the two companies here, we basically agreed to offer these services gratis to We can do it at no charge for existing DonorSearch clients, because frankly, the foundation of the data that they already have, that they've already trusted us with, becomes the foundation of the data that we begin to, that we provide to Futurus to run through the models to come up with the scores. But from frankly, from a retail perspective, this is it, folks. We wanted to have an entry-level product that any nonprofit that was serious about their solicitation, their fundraising strategies would be able to have access to. These basically cover the addition of these pricing. This pricing covers the addition of the raw scores to data that already exists. There is a prerequisite to find that data originally, but for existing clients, that's already been done. For new clients, truthfully, we do that rather affordably as well. This is consistent with the vision that both Nathan's firm and our firm is pursuing. And we're basically trying to bring state-of-the-art technology to nonprofits so that they can begin to use that and test it for improving the efficiencies of their fundraising. So next slide. Oh, incidentally, the principal difference, if you go back to that, the principal difference here is not the volume of records that we're looking at. Interestingly enough, this is a different business model. It doesn't look at the volume of records. What this is looking at is, on the far left, this is where we basically do kind of a once and done model, and the client tests at that point, and if they want to do anything else, they're welcome to do it. But what's going on with the basic, the premium, and the enterprise is it's moving from the initial ranking, and it's moving into full-blown machine learning. So there's a path where you can start at a very affordable level, get a feel for how the rankings work for you. And then if you want to continue to have the model adapt to your successes, excuse me, and as well as the additional data sets that become available, that's what's going on with the basic and the premium. Basically, it comes out to once and done on the intro. The basic is basically it gets run twice. In other words, you get the advantage of a completely redone model the second time you go through. The premium is also, that's one that's done once a quarter. And then the enterprise is done once a month. We're just getting ready to engage with a client right now, which is planning to reconfigure the model, not reconfigure the model, but refresh the model on a monthly basis. I'll also add here too, and if you've used wealth and philanthropic screening before, the key is getting access to fresher data. One of the things that we did to make this enticing was every time we go back and we try to use the machine learning on your behalf, or we use the machine learning, we'll do a complete refresh of any records that you've screened with us. That's another way of kind of bundling additional services in with this. Those of you that haven't had their data refreshed in a year or 2 years or 3 years will certainly understand the value of that. So, special offer. As I mentioned before, DonorSearch clients, you have to be an APRA Maryland member. You have to spend the $40 to become the member. So we thought that would be a reasonable threshold for you to cross. And frankly, it reinforces our support of this local chapter. So basically, if there are any existing clients online here, you can get into the first score or the first review just by becoming a Maryland at APRA Maryland. So now, Andy, will you switch over to the chat questions?
Thank you first initially, and that was great, very interesting. A lot of the questions that have come across in chat are logistics questions, like how many data fields do you need, the percentage of return once you put the data in, how many unable to rates do you get back? The other big question was more of a, do you have a sort of training plan to get the end users knowledgeable in how to, like, first off, how do you sell it to the fundraisers? And second off, how do they use it on their end? Is there some sort of support or training for that?
I'll take a crack at this, and Nathan, if you jump in behind me.
Sure.
In all honesty, the answer is yes. I mean, we're not going to deliver product without training on it. The training, of course, is going to have to be adapted to what the nonprofit plans to use it for. So if let's say you have an annual fund shop that is mailing 100,000 pieces a year, and maybe they're just they're doing acquisitions once a year or twice a year, and then they're doing retention maybe on a more frequent basis. The training has to be tailored to that. When you talk about training for major gift officers, yes, that would have to be handled separately because, frankly, their needs are different. We've found, at least with our staff, that the transition from not having this level of granularity to getting to there, it takes a little bit of an adjustment. Nathan?
Yeah, I agree. There's so many good questions, actually. I was just scrolling through. So one is that you have two companies that are very committed to not just providing the very best data, but to client success. So you essentially get two partners that are invested in supporting your success in that. And having used it with a client, there is a little bit of a learning curve because, and I know what this relates to one of the questions, there's really no minimum in terms of number of records, which is great because it's actually comparing against 6 million national records. So you could literally do this with 100 constituents. It would make no difference in the quality of the model, but it will make a difference if we have or don't have the giving history. So last gift, largest gift at a minimum. And so some of that giving history, which most of the DonorSearch clients already have loaded, is helpful because for the scores minus the acquisition, which doesn't require that, for say the repeat donor score, the retention score, it does require knowing whether this person's a donor or not. But what the other question, kind of somewhat related, is what percentage of the scores come back as 1, 2, or 3? That's something that it depends on a client by client basis. And we found this out early on, is that clients that are more established and more mature have higher scores in some categories, which makes sense because they have more longevity. Their first gift and their last gift, the date between those is much longer. So you look at donors that have more institutional history versus one of the clients that was a COVID startup, the one that I've been using this with. Their donors have only given one time ever because they've been only around for 12 weeks. So the distribution of your 1, 2s, and 3s will depend on your data primarily.
Yeah, the conversion to the simple scores is done on a sliding scale: top third, middle third, bottom third, and then unable to rate on the bottom.
Yeah. And just to reiterate, because Roger asked this question about how many records are included. I know you touched on this, Bill, but it's important because it's so different than, frankly, any other place out there that's doing modeling, is that there's no cap for number of records. Like it's huge. It's a huge difference for us to do this. It's all based on the frequency of rescoring versus, if you have this many to this many constituents, it's this price. If you this many to this many, that's how our industry's worked for 20 years. And frankly, I kind of hate it. Doing this and really simplifying this, the business proposition to say, doesn't matter how many records you have, it's about how frequent you want to rescore those, is really how the pricing model comes into effect.
There's a final question here as to, they qualify for the special offer to APRA Maryland members. And the question is, which score should I do? As it is with special offers, often there's only one of the things that you want. I would turn that around. I wouldn't turn around. Basically, I would say, look at your development operation. Which part of the development operation do you want to try to improve the operations of the most quickly? Because that's the goal here. If you have a very aggressive acquisition program where maybe you're doing acquisitions 2 times a year, 3 times a year, 5 times a year, some shops even do it once a month. Then to me, if that's what you want to try to improve, and usually it is, as the percentages of people who actually convert is very low, then start there. I mean, the goal is to help you, use the initial free offer to rank people, and then at the very least, you can take a look at your results afterwards. The very best solution there would be to actually mail to the people that we suggest that are better, for lack of a better word, better bets. If you're not doing acquisitions, don't get the acquisition score. If you are better off, you can generate more money internally, or you think there's greater potential to try to pursue upgrades, or you're qualifying a database that's been in place for 25 years and you have tons of giving history for it, take a look at the lifetime donors. You won't get the immediate return on it, but what you'll get is you'll get a select group of people that you want to try to begin to invest more with. That would be my interpretation of it. Nathan?
Oh, I was gonna jump in here. I know we're bumping up on time. We had a couple of quick questions for you that I wanted to see if we could address. The first one coming from Sarah: does the retention score look at all the past donors or just in the last few years?
It looks at all the donors that we have the data for. So if we don't know that they were a past donor, then it obviously can't. But if that information is supplied as prior giving history, then it would look at anyone that would have that giving history. So it goes as far back as the data shows.
Perfect. And then a last question. This is coming from Stacy, and I think a lot of people were kind of curious about this. When you were doing your testing, out of the test set, do you remember roughly the percentages that came back as 1, 2, 3, or unable to rate? Do you have a relative idea for that?
Yeah, that actually goes back to what I was sharing about. It depends on the nonprofit, how long the nonprofit, mainly how long and how robust the nonprofit's constituent records are. So in a brand new startup nonprofit, you're going to have more non-rateable because they may not have all the data fields. But for the most part, it's pretty high percentage of people are ranked. What DonorSearch, and we talked a lot about this with the whole team and our team, was that we wanted to make sure that the model prioritized your very best prospects, and not just say everyone is scored from 0 to 1. My lights keep on turning off. And then it's up to you to figure out. The 1, 2s, and 3s are actually built by taking the distribution of your nonprofit scores and then adding 1, 2, or 3, good, better, best to that. I don't think we have a general exact percentage overall. If we had to guess, it's in the 80% plus range are scored.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you gentlemen joining us today. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Nathan. And thank you very much to both DonorSearch and Futurus Group as Apra Maryland sponsors and partners. DonorSearch, thank you very much for offering, allowing Apra Maryland members to take advantage of an offer. For those of you who are still on, thank you for participating. We'll send out sort of a follow-up message. And if you'd like the slide deck, or if you'd like to get the slide deck, you can request from us. The video recording from this will be available on the Apra Maryland website as soon as we get the recording back. Once again, thank you, Bill and Nathan, for your time. It was absolutely fascinating, and join us for the next virtual event soon.
We're excited. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care.